Okay, so hi, I'm Tyler Skluzacek. I'm a research scientist at Oak Ridge National Lab, presenting Parsl and Zambeze, a work in progress in supporting Parsl in our workflow orchestration tool called Rafting Down Your Distributed Science River. And the title of this talk had some initial, excitement around it. And just so Logan can finally exhale, the river stands for the science we all do. And what the fish are doing is we are all the fish just swimming in it. So rest easy. Science, as we all know, is an incredibly simple process. A scientist uses a microscope to fetch raw data, train a machine learning model, and save their visualized results. Easy, right? Well, you all know I'm lying. That quickly descends into configuration and workflow orchestration madness that requires you to have advanced understanding of HPC resources and all of the other underlying technologies. And imagine it requires you to SSH a million times into every machine and get lost in a pile of screen sessions. It requires you to jump in and find your data in Globus and move them around all over the place. And perhaps different parts of your analysis use different workflow tools that would take you weeks to configure. And then you'll lose your files and then have to go dig around in Globus to find them again. So as a manual process, science is really hard, and we aspire to make it slightly easier. And we don't solve all of those problems in this talk, but we start to kind of push towards solving some of them. But what if we could largely ignore cross-facility configuration and just focus on science? So for example, you might have what we call a science campaign that's telling an end-to-end story that might use multiple workflow management systems. And we could call all of these little activities that allow you to go along your science river, your science campaign, in order to get your science done. And so we kind of center ourselves as a group in distributed workflow orchestration, which is the act of organizing and executing application and data flow between separate workflow management systems, between potentially separate compute and storage resources, aka doing the science without having to rewrite a large portion of the science. So the system we work on is called Zambeze, named after a river in Africa, hence all the river and fish puns, which is a distributed workflow orchestration system for science, in which users can, without having to configure their system, represent their data and their compute, and kind of just the flow of the ordering of how these things should be executed. It could be agnostic to the machine. You could just say, run these things, and it will go find a machine that you have an agent running on and run it for you. Or you could fix it. You could say, I want this to run on Frontier because there's some knowledge that I have that Frontier is the best machine to run this job. But Zambeze operates as the centralized orchestration service that just automatically deploys this workflow of workflows across your facilities. And one of the things we were very excited to include was Parsl. A lot of people in our community, especially down at Oak Ridge, use Parsl as their main workflow tool. And so when they perform these workflows across facilities, Parsl was a priority for them, one of the top couple of workflow management systems. And so what we did, we went ahead and created a plugin. So you could have a workflow activity that can plug directly into Parsl, in which you might have your Parsl files stored in a workflow repository. You can fetch them via all of these wonderful things that we're good at, including Globus. You execute them. So you could do a parsl.config and then a run on an arbitrary machine, and then you flush the result to disk. So this is useful and kind of represents the best case scenario of being able to run Parsl, or I could say this interchangeably. You could say Dask, you could say anything. Arbitrary workflows on arbitrary computers. But this comes with a lot of assumptions. First, that people actually properly use workflow repositories and record the necessary metadata and runtime information for their scripts. Two, the workflow logic and configuration logic are separate files, and you could play with different means of doing this. But in reality, you have to create some sort of very definitive schema for how people are writing their Parsl workflows if you're going to inject yourself into them and run them as part of a larger workflow of workflows. And then all data are represented by relative paths. You can't have these data running on an absolute path if you're going to run it on an arbitrary computer. And then finally, all results are flushed to disk so that we can kind of move them from computer to computer. These are all assumptions. And assumption 5 is that people generally hate these crazy assumptions that they themselves did not come up with. So, in the best case scenario, we deal with these assumptions. But in this final portion of my talk, I decided to get unhinged because Parsl Fest is not about giving a safe talk. It's about, really pushing the boundary on what you're allowed to talk about. And my boss doesn't even know about this part. So he's in Brazil. He doesn't care. So we're at a crossroads. So in getting Parsl and Zambeze to run, we have all of these assumptions. And we can either keep pushing slowly along the policies and institutions to make people adopt and use workflow hubs and properly label all of their workflows from top to bottom such that they can be used, in this injection type setting. Or one idea we have is, and this is very work in progress, as in like ideas in progress, we have the idea that we could potentially use LLMs. And this is like a mini golf reference because I missed the mini golf party due to the current influenza I'm getting over. But the idea is you could play your Parsl script as it lies. So if you want to just take an arbitrary Parsl script written in the way that the individual wrote it, so then you should just be able to chuck it in an LLM and get some new Parsl script or new piece of a Parsl script that'll let you, instead of running it on this computer, go run it on that computer instead. And this is actually how I run my day-to-day operations of being a Parsl developer, right? So I work at Oak Ridge. We have Summit, we have Frontier. Oftentimes when I have to go from one to the other, I just chuck it into ChatGPT and it spits out the provider for the other one. It's very good because the Parsl documentation is good and people have, ChatGPT has figured out how to pick up on it. And so kind of one idea I have is if you want to use these assumptions, that's good. Perhaps maybe the community could start to think about ways to fine tune like a large language model to interpret and edit these workflow configuration scripts subject to a user's and resources context information. So I'm no longer unhinged. We're back to being completely hinged. So for the time being, we rely on sensible and somewhat standardized workflow definitions, and we have a couple up and coming projects that are, very much happy with that. But it requires some working with the individuals on the projects to get things ready to go and ready for the Zambeze system. But this just goes to show that, the best case is that the user will tell us exactly what they want to do. But in other cases with these cool new technologies, we're not necessarily hopeless in the future. And in either case, Parsl and Zambeze, we found, is a vital piece in enabling scientists, particularly thus far at Oak Ridge National Lab, to traverse their distributed science river. And so to wrap up, Zambeze is a work in progress at ORNL, and we're heavily invested in supporting Parsl workflows. And we're currently working with our early users to build out the system in such a way that it is useful to them. And so if you are an early user, or if you're a person who develops Parsl scripts, maybe stringing multiple workflow management systems together in order to do your science, might have a cross-facility use case, or selfishly, if you have a Globus Compute use case, you could give me the excuse to build the Globus Compute plugin as well. Come talk to me. I didn't put my email on this slide, but I hope that if you could find me, just Google my name and Oak Ridge National Lab, and my work email will pop up. But thank you for listening, and I will take any questions.
All right. Any questions?
Okay, nobody asked a question. I have a question.
Yeah.
Why Zambeze? What is special about this river?
What is special about what about Zambeze?
Why Zambeze? What's special about the river?
The short story is it was named before I got there. The long story is it has a very rich ecosystem that kind of runs through the jungle. So I'm led to believe, I've never been there myself. And so, there's quiet parts, there's rugged parts, and there's different ecosystems as you go farther and farther down this river. And so the Nile may perhaps be overused. The Amazon may perhaps be overused and hard to create a website about because Amazon.com is taken. And so Zambeze was a natural name / metaphor for what we do.
Great explanation.
Well, thank you, Tyler.
Thanks, Tyler.